Vice Chair, Mr. Lalotta, will take over at this point. The chair now recognizes Mr. Ivey from Maryland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Glad to see my colleague is moving up to the big chair here. I do want to thank you all for coming in to testify. I certainly share the views of Mr. Hoyer with respect to the need for the increases for the judiciary. Cybersecurity, I think, is in particular is an interest of mine, having served on the Homeland Security Committee last year. But personal security for judges and personnel is a big one for me, too. We had a state judge who was assassinated in 2023. He'd made a ruling earlier in the courthouse that day. The aggrieved party followed him home and shot him in his driveway. And I'm aware of the case. I believe there was an individual who threatened, I think it was Justice Kavanaugh, and he's being prosecuted currently. So we know these things are out there, and we know they happen on both sides. I happened to work on the task force last year with respect to the attempted assassination of then candidate Trump. But I do want to say this, though, and I think it's important because there are these issues on both sides in the judiciary and beyond. I think what we say in politics and as elected officials is very important for us to pay attention to. I do think, as Mr. Hoyer pointed out, House Committee, Judiciary Committee Chairman Jordan's comments with respect to cutting funds to the judiciary, depending on some of your rulings, don't agree with that policy for sure. I think it impedes on separation of powers and the independence of the judiciary. But there are certainly others that have crossed the line. And ironically, I think President Trump, certainly falls into that category with some of the statements that he's made. I think with respect to Judge Boasberg, who's practicing here in the District of Columbia, or he's sitting here in the District of Columbia, calling him a troublemaker and an agitator, calling him a crooked judge, that he should be impeached, I thought was totally inappropriate and over the line. Talking about judges as lunatics is another one that I think is bad. And then with respect to Judge Chutkan, who was sitting in one of his criminal cases, he said this judge is the most evil person during the pendency of that case. And I just don't think that's the kind of language that we should be projecting into the public, especially in these times, because we know these are polarized times politically. I know people have strong views out there about what's happening. I have strong views too, but I think it's important for us to not cross that line and say things that we think or should think could generate some sort of a violent response. And then from a legal and constitutional standpoint, the independence of the judiciary, I think that's critical too. I've got 7 House Republican colleagues who filed articles of impeachment against sitting judges. One of the judges I mentioned a moment ago is one of those 7. No showing or even allegation of wrongdoing, particularly just disagreement with the rulings that they issued in those particular cases that happened to involve the Trump administration. And they certainly have a right to their own views, but I think it's important for us, not so much because that might create an issue of violence, but just respect for the Constitution and what it should mean when you start talking about impeaching judges. That's a big step. And I think, to my colleagues here and beyond, we should be very sensitive about making those kinds of statements and crossing those lines. When I was a staffer here in the late 80s, we impeached 2 judges, and they clearly crossed the lines with respect to bribery, for example, and I thought impeachment was clearly merited there because under the standards set by the Constitution, they broke that, and they broke the trust of the American people. But throwing that term around, issuing articles of impeachment kind of willy-nilly is beneath what this institution should be doing. So thank you so much for the work that you all are doing. I know these are going to be challenging times with respect to seeking the increases that you're seeking. I share the need for the increase for federal public defenders, having practiced and been on both sides of that. it's critical to make sure we've got enough people there to handle the workload that's coming through. That workload is certainly in the District of Columbia is increasing, and we need to make sure that we're up to the task on that front and making sure that people have a chance to get equal justice. So thank you for the work that you do. I appreciate your testimony, and I yield back.